All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I am your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early and somewhat a little bit late. You'll have to bear with me, folks. I am playing single dad right now, and turns out it's tougher than you might think. Just kidding. I knew it was tough to begin with. We are out of our normal routine. My wife is in Indonesia right now with her mother-in-law, and my son, well, school ended last Thursday. So I'm getting hit all at once. And then, of course, yesterday we had people coming over to do some work. And then I forgot that this morning, also at 8 o'clock, I would have people here doing some stuff. I got pest control, running around the house, doing a few things, checking things out and whatnot. So it's a bit of a busy morning already. So thank you for bearing with me and tuning in. All right. If you are a candidate, let's get this out of the way. If you're a candidate and you're running for office and you'd like an opportunity to be on the show, I want you to head on over to candidates.libertydad.com and get yourself booked. The link is in the show notes. Available times are Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 8 a.m., Wednesday and Thursday evenings at 8 p.m. All times are Eastern. Speaking of, I have 2 more interviews coming up before I take off. Okay, so Thursday morning, 8 a.m., I'm going to have John Hauer for U.S. House out of Kansas. And then that evening, 8 p.m., Travis Grew for U.S. House out of North Carolina. These are going to be my last 2 interviews for this month. You might say, well, wait a minute, for the whole month? Well, if you're just tuning in or you're not familiar, I will be leaving. And my son and I, my wife, like I said, my wife is in Indonesia right now with her mother-in-law, and my son and I are leaving Sunday. So we will be gone for the rest of the month. So there will be no shows because I just didn't feel like taking all my equipment with me. And then, just the time difference is going to be challenging. Good morning, buddy. What's up? And and then so the time challenge, the time difference, they're like 11 hours ahead. And so trying to do like a morning show, it would be like in the evening for me. I'll probably be out and about, I assume, visiting and checking out things and whatnot. So it struck me as probably not a good opportunity, really. Maybe I'll throw up a couple videos up. I don't know. We'll see. But I just plan on enjoying the time away and spending time with the family. And, I'll probably be on social media. So if you want to catch me there. All right, so with that out of the way, we're going to talk Spanking once again. I know it's a topic that like there are certain topics that go around just periodically. Spanking's one of them. Whether or not you should homeschool your children is another one. Like there's all these topics, and I'm just like, at first, this came about last week. I think it's the tail end of last week, like Friday maybe. I think I saw it posted on like the 28th. So maybe it was over the weekend. And at first I was like, I don't want to talk about that. Like, I feel like I've talked about that over and over and over. And then I was like, well, after the conversation started going and then I kind of got sucked into it on social media, I was like, well, I don't know. I guess we could talk about some of the responses and some of the counter responses. And then I just was like, what's a Liberty Dad if he doesn't talk about disciplining your kid? Right? Like, so we're gonna talk about that today. So here's what started it. And let me pull this up on the screen for you guys. I'm gonna shift over. Let me shift over a little bit here so it makes more sense. All right, there we go. How about that? All right, so here it is on the screen. This New York Post article: shocking number of millennial and Gen Z parents spank their kids. Study says, quote, necessary to raise a child properly. And so they have a link there. That's kind of what kicked everything off. And so let me, I'm going to read the article. I'm not going to put the article up on the screen. This week, we're kind of playing loose and fast. Okay, so you're not going to get the normal show where I put everything up on the screen and make it all super nice. And, you know, because I'm a single dad right now, we're kind of playing Bachelor here at the house. Like, we stay up too late, get up too late. So the whole schedule's off. But anyway, let me read you some of what this article had to say. So it goes, spare the rod and spoil the child. We're going to address that in a minute. A recent study found that a large swath of Gen Z and millennial parents still use spanking as a form of punishment. Now, look, if you needed a study to tell you that, I don't know what to tell you to begin with. Okay? Like, it kind of reads as like, wow, can you imagine that? Yes, I can imagine that. Like, at no point did we flip over as a society and magically change from the way that people have been operating for, you know, thousands and thousands of years. So, like, I just kind of think this is funny because I'll sometimes read an article and it'll be like a recent study found that if this happens or whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, duh, of course. So anyway, I guess some people need a study to tell them. Anyway, it goes on and says, published in the Canadian Journal of Public Health last month. I don't know if that's not a good start, right? Canadian public, whatever. The research revealed that when this demographic of parents was asked whether they had spanked their child or children with their hand, about 20% said yes. Meanwhile, 45% of Gen Xers admitted to spanking their children. Experts say the practice is not beneficial and carries serious long-term consequences. Quoting, I generally do not recommend physical discipline, mother, pediatrician, and parenting expert Dr. Isha Mannering told the Post. While it may result in compliance in the moment, it does so through fear rather than teaching the deeper skills children actually need, such as self-regulation or sound judgment. I actually don't disagree with that, but I do disagree with it. I don't disagree with the fact of the matter. I disagree with using that as an argument. And I'm going to tell you why here in just a moment. While the younger generations use less physical discipline than their predecessors, 15% of the 4,000 adults surveyed reported believing spanking was necessary to raise a child properly. That is also a point I'm going to address. I promise. Like, I know I do this all the time. You guys probably it probably drives some of you bonkers, right? You know, I'm like, oh, I'm talking about something. I'm like, I'm going to address this in a minute. I'm going to address this in a minute. I promise. We're going to get to all of it. However, Mannering notes for children, physical discipline can normalize the use of force as a response to frustration or conflict. A little on the fence with that one. She cites a 2021 study that found children who are spanked at age 3 are more likely to have externalizing behaviors by age 5, including destroying their own belongings or being mean to or physically attacking others than those who were not physically punished. Okay. And look, today we're going to talk about arguments. We're going to talk about addressing, you know, talking to parents, talking to other people. I'm not interested in trying to pick apart a study and say this is a study. That has its point, that has its place, but not here, not today. And then it says, meanwhile, 2017 study found that children who are spanked are more likely to become violent with a romantic partner later in life. That also may be true, but I will point out this, even though I'm not going to I'm not going to try to pick apart a study. Be careful whenever you see something that says something, whenever you read something and it's like more likely, because then the question is more likely than what? Or like, it's almost like when somebody says, well, you have a 50%, this increases your odds by 50%. Okay, well, what were the odds in the first place? If your odds were like 2% and somebody tries to make something sound worse or more dangerous and say, well, this will increase your odds by 50%. Well, if it was already 2%, then now you have a 3% chance. So it's still pretty low. So you have to be very careful when you read these kind of things to make sure that you understand, oh, okay, this could be put in there for effect, or it could be something serious. If your chances were already 50% and doing something raised the possibility by 50%, well, then that's now going to be 75% chance, right? Do you see how that works? So, it depends. It depends on what it was in the first place. 1% chance to begin with, a 50% increase is not a big deal. 50% chance of occurring, 50% chance or 50% increase is a big deal, right? So it really depends on what you're talking about. So now what I want to do is I want to give you a disclaimer, because I feel like on social media, a lot of people present themselves as they are not. We all know that, right? So I'm not going to pretend that we're something here in this household that we are not. So I'm not going to pretend like we have never, ever, ever spanked our child or used physical discipline. I'm not going to pretend that, okay? What I will say is that it hasn't happened in years, and we don't use it because I think we have found alternatives that I believe are far superior. Okay. The amount of physical discipline that our son has received, you could probably count on one hand ever in his whole life. Okay. And I'm not diminishing. I'm not like, oh, it's okay if you only do it once. I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to be forthright with you so that you know where I'm coming from. You know that I'm not pretending to be somebody I'm not. I'm being honest. Right? I think we should always be honest. And, like I told my son the other day, I said, honesty is the best policy, son. And then we had a conversation about why. And I was just like, look, if you tell somebody, like if you tell somebody a lie, the example that I used for him, I said, let's say you took somebody's toy from your friend's house, and then your friend asked you, did you take my toy? And you said no. And I said, the reason honesty is the best policy is because if your friend comes over to your house and sees that his toy is there, now he knows that, one, you stole from him, and then two, you lied about it, right? So now you have two problems that you have to deal with, not just one. If you took his toy and maybe you took it, not on purpose or whatever, maybe it was an accident, right? If you took it and then you say, yeah, I did take it, I forgot I had it in my hand when I left, whatever, right? Now you only have one problem to deal with, one problem to address. But if you lie about it, now you have two problems. And I said, now your friend doesn't want to hang out with you anymore because he thinks you steal from him, and he thinks you're a liar, right? Like, so there's two problems. So honesty is the best policy. So I'm not going to pretend on this show, because if you find out later, like, oh, DL has smacked his hand once or twice back in the day, then you won't trust me. So I want you, my audience, to always trust me. So I will be forthright when I talk about things. All right. So again, you can count the number of times he's been disciplined on like maybe one hand. I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty positive about this. No, I'm like 100% positive. The traditional form of spanking, where like you bend the kid over the knee and you spank him, right? He's never experienced that ever. Okay. I think once there was you kind of grab the arm and you kind of give him a swat on the butt. Like maybe twice, two times, like pat, 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 stop it. I think that happened once. Okay. Exactly once, I believe. Every time that he was disciplined, we had a major thing going on. Okay. So, and again, I'm not trying to downplay. I'm not trying to justify. I'm just trying to be forthright and let you guys know, because I think it actually goes toward my argument that I'm going to make. today. So each time was something very serious. We're not talking about like, oh, did you take a cookie out of the cookie jar? And he's like, no. And then I'm like, I could see the cookies all over your mouth. Of course you did. Right. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about like, oh, you drew on the wall like a 3-year-old I would expect to do. I'm not talking about that either. Right. We're talking about like, I think one time he got swatted because he smacked his grandma. We're like, hey, whoa, we don't hit people, which is, I know it's weird, right? Like you hit somebody to tell them hitting is wrong. Like in hindsight, that was dumb. Okay. So I'm telling you this again, just to be forthright. We're not justifying it. Okay. Could I have done it better? Absolutely. 100%. We hadn't quite got there just yet. So we were learning because it's the first one. And, I did come from a background where all the arguments. All right. Sorry. The pest control guy is running around the house and the dog is too. And she's all like, hey, what are you doing? I don't know. Apologies, folks. This is going to be a tough week, but we're going to get through it. We're going to get through it together. Anyway, so I tell you all this, again, not to boast. I tell you not to justify. I just am telling you so that you understand where I'm coming from. I think it strengthens my argument. Okay. Now let's take a look at something, because this is where when we address the issue of spanking, I think a lot of people address it incorrectly. So like a moment ago, I said like, oh, there's these studies that say like, if you do this, then you might, beat up your partner later. And I'm like, maybe that's true, but I don't think that's a very convincing argument, right? I think there's a lot of arguments that while they may be true, they're not convincing. And who do I mean they're not convincing to? The people that we need to convince of, right? The people that are like, well, I have to spank my kids. I want to convince those people there is a better option. And I think we run afoul in doing that. Pray. Oh, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. This might have been the worst day to do a podcast, guys. My son came in with like a little note and he was like, I guess the pest control asked him something and he was, so he wrote it, and he can write now. So he like writes the letter and he's like, but look, this is great actually, in a way. Think about what just happened. My son came in quietly with a note that says, do you want this? Do you want the pest control guy to do this? And then he whispered to me, like without me telling him, without spanking, without any of this stuff, he recognized Daddy is podcasting. Let me come in there quietly and ask him this question that has to be addressed. I'm just saying, right? Okay. So I think a lot of arguments are not nearly as convincing as people believe they are. So let's kind of look and try to address some of those. So let's start with something that really triggered a lot of people. Okay. So this is, and I'm going to move myself a little bit, myself on the screen here a little bit. There we go. All right. So this is a guy named Sam Hyde. I don't really know who he is. Doesn't matter. He quotes the New York Post. Okay. And he says, hitting your kids is in the same category as circumcision, iPads, strict adherence to the CDC vaccine schedule. It is for N's. He means the N word. Goyim, that's the slang term, I think, that Jews might use to talk about non-Jews, and Walmart pajama people. Okay. So let's just start with that. Who did you think you were going to convince with that? If spanking is for those people, did you think that leading with that was going to get their attention and go, well, I don't want to be that? No. See what I mean? Like, I feel like the very first sentence, like this is just nothing more than locker room jabber where all the guys are high-fiving each other and they're not actually convincing the outside world. They're just kind of congratulating each other like, aha, boy, you showed him. Okay, great. Anyway, it lowers IQ, increases aggression, is less effective than a timeout, and requires escalation to keep working. Now, I do agree with the escalation to keep working. I do. not 100%, but I do kind of agree with that. The replies to articles like this are filled with the dumbest people who ever existed saying, it worked for me, and then genuinely malicious and hateful morons dropping reaction gifs of like Daffy Duck swinging a belt. Okay, fine, but who did you think, again, who are you talking to? You can't possibly have thought you were talking to somebody who spanks their child and justifies spanking. Because there was no situation where somebody's going to be like, I don't want to be the pajama Walmart person, even though I am. And so therefore I'm going to stop spanking my kid. So you'll stop insulting me. Right. This is the, and so, you know, I find this so frustrating because it's like, I want to convince, think about this for a minute. A lot of people that are opposed to spanking will say it's abuse. Okay, fine. I have some problems with that. I think we use the word abuse for way too many things. That's a separate point. Okay. But if you really believe it's abuse, do you actually believe that insulting people is going to get them to stop abusing somebody? Really? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be all cupcakes and rainbows. It's Pride Month, I guess. We could say rainbows. I don't know, whatever. But I think we have to be mindful and say, if I really want people to stop doing this bad thing, how do I best make that happen? That's the argument that I think we should be focusing on. Every state in America allows you to physically correct your child. It's legal. It's fun. Bring it on. Profile says cat sanctuary dad. Now, I don't know if that's an actual quote. I don't really know. But he's kind of mocking people. He's either mocking them by exaggerating what they might say, or he's quoting them to further mock them. Right? Unyielding steel, workouts, keto, cats, chaos, anime, rants, Godzilla, Gundam, Mazinger. I don't know what that is. Ultraman, classical art, manga. So I assume he's either citing somebody's profile and what they said in response, or he's making fun of somebody that supports it by exaggerating what they say and what their profile might look like. So again, you're just insulting people. You will not insult people out of abusing somebody. So if you actually care about what you believe is abuse, then perhaps you consider your own damn words, right? And look, I remember I got into it with a peaceful parent type a long time ago. And we were on Facebook, and somebody was like, this study proves that spanking your kids results in this. So I read the study, and I came back and I said, actually, the study doesn't prove that. And I said, there's a lot of problems with presenting it as if it's what it said. That's all I said. I didn't come back and say you should spank your kids. I just said the study doesn't prove it, and here's why. And I laid out a couple of reasons, right? They jumped into my DMs and cursed me out. And they were like, you abuser, blah, 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 effing this, effing that. And I was like, whoa. And I was like, so you're telling me that you're a peaceful parent who cannot peacefully make an argument to an adult, or at least start that way. I mean, I could understand if at some point I started berating the person and then they fired back in return, right? You know, match energy for energy. I can get that. But that's not what happened. And that's the most dramatic experience, but I've had other experiences along that same line where literally from peaceful parents, where they will actually make all kind of accusations and be insulting. And I'm like, I hope that you really don't talk to your kids like this, but by the way that you're talking to me, you're not convincing me you're a peaceful parent. You're not a peaceful adult, that's for sure. So then he goes on and he says, if you hit your kids, you will create permanent emotional distance with the only people you could ever be that close to, not to mention sending them down the road of being as much of a lost F-up loser as you are, who will hit their own kids or won't, but only after spending a decade figuring out why they reflexively apologize all the time. Okay, look, that is an awful argument. That is an absolutely awful argument. Why? Number one, you're preaching to the choir. This is the slap it, high fiving the guys in the locker room while not actually convincing anybody else. Number two, you're not only failing to address other people's reality, you're actually arguing against their own experience. Okay? Because he said, if you hit your kids, you will create permanent emotional distance. Look, my mother spanked me. The running joke was, my mother spanked me every single day. It's not really true, right? But I got spanked a lot because I was a wild kid. Absolutely, insanely wild. My mother told me, if we told you not to do something, it was basically the same as telling you go ahead and do it, right? That's basically how I treated it. I was just, I was headstrong and I did what I wanted to do, period. And so I got spanked all the time. My mother, I dearly loved that woman. She passed away in 2016. I am still bitter at the universe over this, okay? Because she was 59. She passed away very early, and I am very bitter over that. And you will be hard if you saw the relationship that I had with my mother, the deep connection, how much we were we couldn't get any closer as a mother and son. I don't think it was possible. And then you tried to say, well, DL, if you spank your kid, you're going to create this emotional distance. BS. And here's the thing. It's not just me. I'm not this is not that meme where it's the average, and then somebody's like, well, it didn't work for me. It's not that meme. A lot of people have the same experience. A lot of people. So in fact, it's kind of the reverse of the meme when you say that. And I'm talking about that meme where it's got a guy and he's the average height of a woman is 5'2" or 3 or something like that. And then the woman who's sitting next to him goes, well, I'm 5'6", and he just kind of looks at her. It's she doesn't understand what average is, right? It's the reverse of the meme. If you run around and you tell people, yeah, this is going to create emotional distance between you and your child, and the average person is I don't have emotional distance from my parent, even though I was spanked, you are the meme. You are the person that is talking out of order, even if there is some truth to what you say. And I think it's because a lot of people that are against spanking, while they may be on the correct side, they may have the correct position, they don't really know what they're talking about. So let's talk about the reality. There are basically two reasons that people support spanking, okay? There are basically two reasons. Number one, a lot of people have been spanked and they turn out fine, okay? Now, what does that mean, turn out fine? It's very subjective. What you say is turn out fine, or what I say is turn out fine are going to be subjective. But like I just told you, if you saw the relationship with my mother and I said, was I spanked or not? Based on what people say, they would have to go, you probably were never spanked, even though I was spanked all the time. Okay? So in terms of turned out fine, or if you look and say, well, DL, you turned out to be a pretty good human being. You don't spank your kid. You function well in society. Maybe you speed from time to time, and occasionally you take that light just as it turns red, right? But otherwise, you're a pretty good upstanding citizen. You pay your taxes if you believe that kind of a thing. You treat people well. You don't abuse, you don't kick the dog, you don't smack the wife, you don't yell at her, you don't call her names. You try to run your family in a respectable manner. You're generally a good guy. You turned out fine, right? And I did. And many people have. But again, turned out fine is very subjective. Not a good definition for that. But that's one of the reasons why people believe it. The other reason that people support it, I guess maybe there's three. That depends on how you look at it, I suppose. But the other reason is that people don't want their child to grow up to be a psychopath. So people will look and say, well, if spanking will prevent my child from being, from hurting animals and going on to hurting people, then by golly, they're going to spank their kids. You're not addressing that when you make these arguments. You're not addressing the reason people do it.
You are just catering to your own view and all of those around you. And so I think it makes most of the arguments against spanking futile. They're ineffective, which is weird because it's kind of a bit of an irony there. You're like, well, spanking isn't as effective as this. Well, neither is the argument that you're making. So shouldn't you also reconsider your argument in the same way that you're trying to get people to consider how they discipline their child? Now, astute people of this show, watchers of the show, they will notice that my arguments aren't always aligned with why I think something is bad. And that's because I would rather focus on an argument that I believe is most convincing. Because otherwise, why would I bother? Right? Why would I bother if I'm not going to try to make a convincing argument to the person that I want to change? I want your mind to change. So shouldn't I also focus on, well, what is your rationale for doing something? Even if I don't like it, okay? I don't have to like your rationale. I could think your rationale is completely bonkers, and that's okay. That's what I have to address, though, right? And so, a lot of people will, their argument will be, one, I want to prevent my kid from growing up to be a psycho. And then they'll say, it's always been done that way. Always been done that way kind of falls into that same category of, hey, I turned out fine, right? My grandparents were spanked. They were great. They were great grandparents. They loved my kid. They gave me ice cream all the time. They helped me do this. My grandpa, taught me how to do this. My dad taught me how to do this. Like a lot of people have a very fond memory of their parents and their childhood. And so when they say, well, it's always been done like that, or, when they fall back on that argument, it's kind of like a twofold thing. One, it turned out fine. Again, subjective term. And that's how it's always been done. They can look back through history. My dad was spanked. My grandpa was spanked. My great-grandpa was spanked. Right? And this is the argument that people use. This is the rationale. You don't have to like it, but you do have to address it. As my friend Dave Smith says, contend with the argument, not your own. All right? And then preventing your child from growing up to be a psycho. That one is an admirable thing. I want a parent to go, I don't want my kid to grow up to be spoiled or to be a psycho and hurt people. Those are objectively good things. Those are good goals. Every parent should have them. So instead of leading with how people say, oh, it's going to harm your child, it's going to do this, it's going to do all these things that run counter to your experience, what I do is I kind of flip the script and I go, all right, fine. That's what you want? I agree. You should want those things. So let me ask you this question. This is my favorite question I ask people. If you can raise a child to be a respectable adult without hitting them, shouldn't you? That changes things because now I'm contending with their argument, which is I don't want my child to grow up to be a bad person. Okay, great. I don't either. Now, if you can do it and you don't have to hit them, shouldn't you? Wouldn't that be more desirable? And now if a parent says, no, I want to hit them, well, now we have a problem. Okay, we can address that. And maybe that's the point where we start really laying into a person and be like, are you a psycho if you want to continue hitting your kid, even if you don't have to? Right? Now people will object and they'll go, no, but you can't. Like, whoa. We haven't got there. We're asking a simple question. If you can get this result without hitting, shouldn't you? Shouldn't you want to? Shouldn't you put all the effort into it that's necessary to not have to do that? Most people are going to say yes, right? They'll have their objections, and then we can address those objections. But I want to start in their mind by getting a yes, because that opens the door for a more meaningful conversation. And that's how you start to convince people. You don't convince people by insulting them. You don't convince people by running counter to the experience that they had, right? I remember years ago, there was a young lady that I was having a debate with, and about spanking. And she was adamant. She was like, it's abuse, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, so are you saying my mom abused me? And she wouldn't say it. She would not say it. And I kept pressing hard because I think she knew. She understood. If she said, yes, your mom abused you, she's now going to have to contend with the fact that I grew up to have a wonderful relationship with my mother, and that I don't look back and say that I was abused. Now, do I look back and say that I needed to be spanked? No, I don't say that, right? This is why I have a problem with the word abuse, okay? And let me just kind of throw in there real quickly what I mean by that. I believe back when I was an evangelical, we used to point out that the Bible had that the ancient was it Greek? I think Greek had like 3 words for love, right? And there was like a love for your parents, a love for your God, a love for your spouse. There was like different types of, and so you used a different type of word to reference that. Whereas today we use the same word to say I love my wife, I love eating Oreo cookies. Right. But we instinctively know what the difference is. I think abuse kind of falls into this category. And I don't think it works as well as, okay, I love cookies, I love my wife, where everybody kind of understands the distinction. Right. I think the problem with abuse is that when we say something is abuse, it becomes a very wide catch-all, and it loses a lot of meaning. And so back to my mother, she was heavily abused as a child, in a way that virtually nobody would argue with. Right? So there's no, and I'll tell you one of the stories because she freely told the stories, and she has, I know that even though she has passed away, she would not have a problem with me telling the story. Okay. So her dad was an alcoholic, and he would come home drunk, go upstairs, pull her out of her bed by her hair, throw her down the stairs, and then go stomp on her head. Okay. That kind of stuff. One time he came home and her mom was telling the story of like what happened for the day. And I guess she had gotten in trouble for something. And her dad looked at her and said, "Is that true?" And she said, "Well, sir, not exactly." And then he backhanded her and said, "Don't you call your mother a liar?" Right? This is the kind of experience that my mother grew up with. Okay. These are objectively, people would say that is objectively abuse. Is there somebody out there that would say it's not? Probably. There's always somebody. There's always an exception. But the majority of the people, if I told those stories, which are true, if I told them to somebody, they would say, wow, that's awful. That's horrible. I can't imagine treating a child that way. So now when you have abuse for that kind of behavior, and then if somebody says, well, spanking your kid to keep them from running in the road, which is an argument that people make, if you say that's abuse, you are now basically putting both of those situations in the same category. I think it's a problem, and I don't think it works. That doesn't make it okay. That just means we need to address them differently. Okay? So, that's kind of where I am. Now, we're going to go to a commercial break here for a moment, and we're going to take an intermission. Then we're going to come back, and I'm going to talk a little bit more. I'm going to show you some things on social media. I'm going to give you some of my responses and some ways that I think we can more effectively counter the pro-spanking narrative. But I kind of wanted to lay a foundation because I think it's very important to understand we can't just run around and be like, spanking is abuse. You're an idiot if you spank your kid. You're a total monster. Okay, great. You've just alienated them, and they're not going to listen to you. And so as far as I'm concerned, and people aren't going to like hearing this, but you need to hear this. If you're the kind of person that runs around saying that spanking is abuse, saying that the kids won't love you, your kids won't love you when you get older, you are contributing to spanking. You are contributing to the very abuse that you claim to want to stop. And how are you contributing? By making such a shoddy argument that people don't listen. I have never once heard somebody say, I was insulted out of spanking my child. I have never once heard somebody go, man, I was afraid that my child wouldn't love me, so I stopped spanking them. By the way, if we're talking about parents and children, you're supposed to love your children. You're supposed to do things because you love them, right? Not because you fear what might happen, which is the same reason they spank. Right. So I don't think these are effective on net balance, on the average. Will somebody be affected? Maybe. Okay. There's always the exception to the rule. So let's take a quick intermission. We'll come back. We'll actually address some of the arguments with what I think are better arguments.
Let us make man. This is the scripture where God was talking about creating the human. And when he talked about creating the human, he said, let us make man. And for me, the us in let us make man entails and implies to me that I should be assisting God with making men. And this is where the X for Boys comes into play. This is the new man-making machine in Albany, Georgia. We started the X for Boys program in January of 2019. Albany, Georgia is one of the poorest cities in the nation, and also Albany, Georgia has one of the highest crime rates in the nation. And so I took it upon myself to curb that by working with young men and boys in the community and teaching them how to work in the skilled trades, such as working on cars, fixing houses, simple home improvement, simple brake repair, oil changes, plumbing, anything of that nature, to try and help boys actually use their hands.
I appreciate King Randall for taking the time out of his life to give us young men the opportunity to do things that can help us be better men and better people in life.
The X for Boys is creating men that'll be self-sufficient, that will be able to protect their women and children, and will be able to go out and earn things for themselves. We do not teach victimhood. There is nobody holding us down. I am teaching the boys that they can go out and get whatever it is that they want when they want it to. They have the same Father as Jesus, and that is God. And so they are able to go and do whatever they want to. The scripture says, greater is the God that is in me than the God that's in the world. So it's up to us to teach them about the God that's in themselves and to create everything that they want. Let us make man. Follow us on social media at New Emerging King, and you can go to the xforboys.org for our website.
All right. We're back. I love following, I think he goes by King Randall on social media. He's got some great videos where he teaches children, young boys, how to interact with the police, how to pump gas, how to do all these cool things, change tires, all that stuff. Really great work. So support that 100%. All right, let's get into this. So I saw this on social media, and this is a fair question. Genuine question for the anti-spanking crowd. How do you address blatant disobedience in your child? I'm not against a different way to discipline. I've just never been presented with an effective alternative. Just reason with them only works if they're being reasonable. That's fair. That's absolutely fair to ask. And I appreciate that somebody's like, okay, I'm willing to hear you out, but I need to hear how this works. So I gave a long post, and I'm going to walk you through it. And this is going to kind of give you an idea how we implement this no spanking. Because I think the problem that we run into is that people just kind of focus on no spanking, and it's like, oh, if you don't spank, your kids will just be raised fine. Like, okay, but what else needs to happen? And I actually think a lot needs to happen. And it may feel overwhelming, as many of the responses to me were. So I said, I believe we cultivated our son to generally avoid blatant disobedience. Here's what I think contributed and how we discipline, which is infrequent. Okay? So I think this whole, if you want to talk about how do you stop them from being blatant disobedient? I don't think you could ever stop blatant disobedience. That's the nature of a child. They're just at some point going to not listen. They're going to try, especially young boys, but sometimes girls too, right? So here's some of the things that I pointed out. I said, number one, we took him everywhere with us. Wife to real estate meetings, me to libertarian meetings, both of us took him to like friends' house with us, out to visit friends, out to dinner, so on and so forth. We just drug him everywhere. We didn't stay at home. We drug him everywhere. Now, sometimes maybe he stayed home with grandma. Okay. And so that did happen. But our son, from the day he was born, was frequently in the company of adults. What does he grow up seeing? He grows up seeing how everybody behaves. Hey, we take turns when we talk. We maybe get loud and laugh and maybe, hey, calm down there, buddy. Whatever. He sees how adults are behaving. That's his experience. Let me ask you something. How do you think children learn to speak? By listening to adults. That's why they were always told not to use a lot of curse words when you're around your kids, or maybe at all, because they will hear them and they will use them, right? Because they're mirroring what you do. So I think one of the number one things that we did is he got to see how adults behave as adults. And so that's what he mirrored. Because he's like, this is what you do. We encouraged active participation. We'll never forget when ordering dinner one night, he piped up and asked, what do you have for kids? We went with it. And that was an amazing story. So like we would go out to eat and he would sit there and he could talk and we would say, what do you have for kids? And then the waitress would be like, well, maybe we're ordering drinks. And she would be like, well, we have lemonade and we have, soda and we have this and that. And then we would pick, lemonade or unsweet tea or something like that. And we'd be like, Zach, what do you want? And he would be like, oh, I want this. But one day out of just nowhere, he actually got up on the table and kind of leaned forward. And because I had ordered a drink, my wife had ordered a drink, and he's like, what do you have for kids? Before we could even speak. And we were like, well, okay. And so what did? We didn't shush him. We looked at the waitress for her answer. Because we were like, well, what do you have? Answer the boy. I mean, we didn't say it that way, but that's kind of the attitude that we took. Like, all right, answer. And from that point on, he engaged with the servers every time. He would ask what they had for food or whatever, and he would do his ordering. Now, we would help drive, and we'd be like, all right, here's the kids' menu and all that. So it's not like we were handing him the menu for like a $50 steak or something, but we were like, yeah, go ahead. Figure it out. You're going to have to do this one day anyway. Might as well start now, right? What is it? This encourages him to expect that he is treated the same way that he sees everybody else being treated. And it also teaches him to expect to behave in the way. So when the waitress comes and we're like, and she drops off my unsweet tea, and then I say, thank you. He sees that. That's what you do. You say thank you when somebody gives you something. You say please. You ask them a question politely. Those are the things that we taught him by doing them. Okay? We encouraged this. The other thing that we did is that we encouraged exploration of the world in general. So sometimes one day he wanted to help plug in the lamp. And he was like, I don't know, 3? I don't know. I don't remember the exact age. So I was just like, all right, here's how you do it. And I would do it. And then I would hold his hand and show him how to do it. And we let him explore the world. And now there was a limit. If it was too dangerous, then we didn't let him do it. Okay. So he's 7. And to this day, he has never, ever, ever been permitted to touch the table saw. Ever. Okay. He'll come out in the garage with me and he'll work, but I never let him touch the table saw. Right? Because I have deemed it, he is not yet ready for that. He cannot comprehend the dangers of it. And because he cannot comprehend the dangers of it, he cannot properly ensure that he is doing the right thing. But he does get to watch. So he can see how I handle the table saw, how I handle other things that are dangerous. And then once I've determined that that it's time for him, and I'm making a judgment call. I probably make them earlier than many other people because I'm like, oh, you show an interest in it? As long as I feel like I can keep you safe, fine, we'll do it. So I think those 3 things line up a child to engage the world around them properly, right? We take him everywhere. We let him see what we're doing. The moment he wants to engage with an adult, we do our best. I mean, he sometimes does have to take like a back seat. Like if we're talking about something and and he would come up and he would try to interrupt, and we'd be like, hold on, you have to wait your turn. You don't just get to interrupt people, right? And we would make him wait. And there were a few times where when we got done with our conversation, we would say, what did you want, buddy? And a couple of times he's like, you took so long, I forgot. So anyway, but he's learning by participating. So then I said, I think these three things started him on a path toward properly understanding how the world works, physically and socially. All right. So then we go on and I say, we level set with expected but undesirable behavior. Drawing on the wall, expected, but now you get to clean the wall. Now, why would I level set that way? Well, by level setting and saying, I know he's going to draw on the wall one day, I'm preparing myself not to get angry about it. Because in my mind, I was like, should I really get angry about something that's a normal kid behavior? Like, if I go and I grab any parent in this country and I say, my 3-year-old drew on my wall, they can be like, yep, they do that. Right? So when I say normal behavior, I just mean things that basically every parent is going to experience. Normal in this case doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good thing. Okay? Doesn't mean that it's okay. That just, and maybe it is, but maybe you have a chalkboard wall, whatever. Right? But in general, it's not normal here in the sense that it should happen. It's normal that it does happen. It's very common. Abnormal would be like, my dog took the fork and poked the dog in, or my son took the fork and poked the dog in the eye. He's never done it. But like that would be out of the ordinary. That would be very unacceptable. And that would be not something that we level set and go, yep, I'm expecting he's going to poke the dog in the eye. No, I'm expecting he's not going to do that. And if he does, he's going to get in trouble. Okay. This leads to the next one. Mind our own temper. It's easier when we level set, because if you're angry too often, it's just your parents getting mad again. But if you're angry infrequently, ooh, this must be serious. I dated a girl a long time ago, and she had a bit of a temper. And she would just get mad at all of the friends about, just kind of like off the cuff. And they would just be like, oh, she's just mad again. But I was pretty chill and cool. And when I got mad, people were like, whoa, what's DL mad about? Right? Same thing with a parent. If I'm getting mad every time he turns around about something, it tells him dad's an angry person. But if I rarely get angry, number one, what I'm angry about must need attention. Whoa, dad's angry. Why is he angry? Number two, if I don't get angry that often, I don't have to escalate it. I don't have to scream and kick things around and act like a crazy man, because it's sufficient to say, it's almost like you can go, son, I'm very disappointed in you. And that means something if it doesn't happen very often. It doesn't mean something if you're disappointed every single day. Same thing with raising your voice, yelling, all that good stuff. It means less. So back to that comment where it's like, you have to escalate. I think that's true. You have to escalate your you being upset to the next level so that they hear you. But you don't have to do that if you level set and you say, all right, some things are just going to happen. And it's okay. Okay in the sense like the world's not going to end. We can address this. And my son did draw on the walls. And then we were like, oh, that's a nice drawing. Now, here's how you clean the wall, because you're not supposed to. And then at some point we were like, no, you draw on the paper. And that's how we approached it. Let's see. What else? I said, allow him to be angry constructively. Throw your toys, I'm going to take them away. Stomp your feet and scream, go do that in your room. Okay? Why do I say this? Anger is a very natural emotion. And he's going to be angry because he hasn't learned how to control his emotions. How can he learn how to control his emotions properly if we don't let him practice? If I want him to be good at soccer, we're going to go out and we're going to practice soccer, right? So that he gets good at it, because he's not going to be good at it. If I want him to be good at managing his anger, I have to allow him to not manage it so well. But we create a guideline. You can't throw your toys. You can't kick stuff. There are limits. You cannot do this. You figure out something else. If you need to go and jump on your bed and scream in a pillow, that's fine. right? And then as you get older, you learn that you don't even have to do that, right? But for now, if you're 3 or 4 and you want to stomp your feet or you want to lay and cry, okay, that's fine. And we've done that. And then eventually we said, all right, that's enough crying. You're done. Now you need to dry it up and we need to move forward, right? And we've gradually just worked him toward doing it better and better. But we've allowed it and then just increased the guide rails. Okay? Oh, now we're not allowing this. Yep, you can cry, you can be upset, you can go to your room and sulk. We're not going to be mad at you. Why? Because anger is a natural emotion. How else is he supposed to experience it? When an issue is resolved, it is resolved. Move on and enjoy each other. So let's say he gets in trouble for something that he shouldn't have done. All right? We're like, hey, you go to your room for a while. And he goes to his room. Then he comes back out. And I'll say something like, are we done? He'll be like, yes. Okay. And then we move on being happy. Right? We're done. Now, maybe it might take a few minutes for that happiness to come in. I don't expect him to necessarily come out. Maybe he got in trouble and I said, no more screen time for the rest of the day. And he's up, he goes and cries and we come out. And I don't expect him to necessarily be happy, but I'm not going to do 2 things. I'm not going to demand that he be happy. I'm going to let that come out naturally, but I'm also not going to rub it in. I'm not going to be like, well, I bet you won't do that anymore, huh? I'm not going to, because parents like to take those jabs every now and then. Like, oh yeah, you're going to cry like you did earlier? We don't do that. That's not acceptable. Because if a problem is over, it's over. It's over for the child. It's over for the parent. I'm the parent. It's my job to do these things. This one I love. This is my favorite. I say, use the pause. If you've ever been in Toastmasters, they'll tell you that the pause is like magic when you're public speaking. You say something and you put in a well-timed pause, and it just really can accentuate in a way that raising your voice, inflecting your voice, whatever, can't do. Okay? So, this is a good way to say, you know better, I'm upset with you, long pause. And one time, I remember one time, he was in his grandma's room and I said, all right, no more screen time for the day, but you can play with your grandma. So he goes in his grandma and I open the door and he hides something under the bed, like I didn't see it. And I was like, and I go over there and I saw that he had grandma's phone because grandma's going to do what grandma does. Fine, whatever. So I'm like, you weren't supposed to be on the screen. And I just looked at him. I said, what should I do now? And then I just looked at him and just long pause. And he looked at me and I didn't say anything. I didn't give him a mean face. I just kind of stared kind of stoically at him, just letting his own mind work against him. And you could start seeing his eyes tearing up, because he knew he was in trouble, but he had no idea how to manage this because he was just like, I'm in trouble. And this pause is making it more nerve-wracking for me. I didn't touch him. I didn't even yell at him. I was like, you were wrong. What should I do about it? Then I stared. Gave him the dad stare. Right? And I think these are effective ways. But again, it starts early. And then I go on and I say, I think these build an understanding of proper conflict resolution on both sides. This is where I think a lot of people fail. This is where the anti-spanking people fail, is they don't actually offer parents real alternatives and how you can address this stuff. A couple more things that I said. Ensure plenty of activity. Give him problems to solve, puzzles, Lego builds, various projects, right? Because I firmly believe many boys get into trouble for lack of energy expenditure and exercising their mind. Boys are naturally curious. They want to get into things. They want to see how they think. Like the other day, we get in the car. My son's like, Dad, how does an oil change work? What? What are you talking about? Like that was just a random question. So I pull up the phone and I just type in how oil change works into YouTube, and I play a video that explained it for him while we're driving, and he got to watch the video and we could listen to it. Right? They're naturally curious. If you tried now look, you're not going to satiate that ever. They got question upon question upon question. But I think the more that you give to that, the more you exercise their mind. And then, of course, exercise their body. Because that energy, that demand has to go somewhere. It's kind of like what they say, if you don't give a kid attention, they'll act out to get your attention, right? It's that same thing. I'm giving him attention. I point out 90 to 95% of the time he gets in trouble, he's also tired and having trouble managing himself. So we do two things. Number one, I don't cut him any slack. Just because you're tired doesn't mean that you get a pass and you can act inappropriate. You still have to act, you still have to behave, which means if you're not behaving, you will still get in trouble. You might get sent to your room, you don't get no more tablet time, your friend has to go home, whatever the case is. Okay? So being tired is not a pass. Number two, then because we know he's tired, we help quickly usher him to get rest. Go take a nap. And there's been a few times where he's like, I don't want to take a nap, I'm not tired. We're like, trust me, I'm your daddy. I know you are tired. You need a nap. And so we might have a little bit of an argument. I'll be like, take a nap. I don't want to take I said, take a nap. And then he'll go and he'll take a nap. And then when he gets up, I'm like, do you feel better? And he's like, yes. Like, yes, because daddy knows. Daddy knows a thing or two. Okay. And then we carry on, right? And he doesn't get in any more trouble because we try to manage, okay, the fact of why is he getting in trouble right now? Now, there are very, very few times that he's actually just being a pain in the butt. This does happen because people are people. Lastly, and this may be the most important, take interest in what he likes and give him praise for things he does well, even a simple drawing. Okay? We don't spank because we don't have to. A raised voice is generally enough. Taking toys away or grounding him is actually when it escalates. That's our escalation, right? I don't believe the means to not spanking isn't just don't spank. It's an entire way of parenting. That is how you address it. Now, you might be asking yourself, DL, what happens if I have a 7-year-old? You're going to need to seek out some counseling. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a family counselor. I am just telling you from the very beginning, how do we foster a child such that we don't have to spank? Now, let me give you some counter responses that people gave me. I love this one. This one actually, or that I've seen. They didn't necessarily give them to me, but I've heard them or people have said them to me. So here's one from a guy named Eric. He said, "You're not smarter than God. In fact, refusing to use the rod of correction means you hate your child." And then he quotes the Bible. "Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him." Proverbs 13:24. Okay, the operative word in there, Eric, and every other Christian, is discipline. Okay? Now, it does say, spare the rod, hate the son, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if people are aware of this. Psalms, Proverbs, and several other books in the Bible, they're known as not the wisdom collection, the wisdom something, but they're the books of wisdom. These are where they're trying to make a wise point, and sometimes they do it poetically through like metaphors or examples or other ways of communicating so that you get the point. In other words, they may or may not need to be taken literal. So my response to this, I said, oh, did I have that? Oh, no, I know. Let me go back. This is how I do it. All right. I said, Christians will interpret Proverbs and Psalms literally while having neither a rod nor staff in their home. There is a certain irony in poorly interpreting the wisdom literature that is full of hyperbole to make a moral point. Discipline does not require hitting. Okay? So let me expand on this some more. If you go and you research, you'll find that there are two different types of sticks, if you will, in the Bible, a rod and a staff. The staff is what the shepherds use to like guide their sheep and do some other things. Okay. And then you had this rod. And if you look it up and you find out that the rod was more like a club. Okay. Why did they have a club? The rod was for like correcting your sheep or helping them direct the sheep, navigating them, pulling them out of a ditch, whatever they used it for, right? It was not for fighting. The rod was to help defend the sheep against other wild animals and other things. Okay. So it was more like a club. And you probably don't have a club in your house. Nor should you be using a club to hit your kid. If you were to be out and about and you tap your kid on the shoulder with the club, okay, I'll grant that one. So perhaps that's what they were talking about. I don't know. But what I do know is that in no way, shape, or form do I need a club to discipline my kid. Okay? I can discipline him. And God's not going to be mad if my child is raised up decently and respects people, doesn't hurt them, doesn't steal their stuff. God's not going to be angry because nowhere in the scripture does it say you absolutely must spank your kids. What it says, what it's talking about is discipline. You cannot just not discipline your kid, for which I agree. Now, if you want to make the argument that back in the day they were spanking, and that's fine. But if you're not going back and talking about the culture of the time and the society that they had to operate in, if you're not having that conversation and then overlaying that with the society that we have today, then you're really having an incomplete conversation. And in my opinion, you're pulling the Bible out of context and you're selfishly using it to justify your own behavior. And more importantly, if you don't have a club and a rod in your house, I don't want to hear you citing these passages and saying, oh, the Bible says, okay, well, do you have those things in your house? Do you have a club for which you could defend if somebody broke into your house? No, you don't? Shut up. I don't want to hear it. Not interested. Right? Do you see the problem here? I mean, I'm addressing the you come at me with this, I'm going to address it. Show me your rod. Show me your staff. Show me how you would defend if a robber came in. Okay, I don't want to hear you talk about, I got to spank my kid. Because nowhere in there does it actually say you must spank your kid. It says you have to discipline your kid. And I'm telling you that you can actually discipline your child without ever hitting them, and you can get the results that you want. Another one was this was interesting. Let me scroll down a little bit. So this person said, these gentle parenting types, by the way, gentle parenting, peaceful parenting, they're not the same. People use them interchangeably, but they're not the same. I'm not entirely certain what the difference is, and I don't claim to either do gentle or peaceful parenting per se. All I just say is we don't spank our kid. That's how we do it. All right. So he says, these gentle parenting types honestly believe that a 30-minute conversation about feelings and how them drowning would make mommy feel bad, followed by an in-depth explanation of the concept of death, is more effective and palatable for a toddler than don't be around the pool without mommy or daddy watching and spanking them if they don't listen. Okay. No, actually, that's not true. And so I posted in response, I said, our 7-year-old has lived his whole life with this backyard. And then I show a picture of, well, you can't see it on the screen, but I show a picture of the lake that's behind our house. I could pull it up like this. All right. So you can see the lake behind our house, and there's no fence because I haven't built it yet. I'm working on it. Right. And so he's lived his whole life, 7 years. And I said, he's never fell in. I said he fell in once while we were fishing, and that was last year. He also comes into my garage/shop while I woodwork. And he has his own tools, real tools, by the way, safe ones, like a wrench and stuff like that, screwdriver, whatever. And I said, we ensured his safety without ever spanking. He has never once, ever been hit to prevent him from going into the lake or to be mindful of how he operates the tools. Never once. Then I did end it and I said, I did lock the shit out of some doors though, which I did because I was paranoid. I'm like, well, I don't want my kid to fall in the lake. So I went around and I put locks that he couldn't reach that were way up high. And you might say, well, Dale, what if he walks over there and stacks up chairs and stuff? Because kids do that. Number one, I say parent your kid. That means you pay attention when they're at that age. Okay. And I know that gets me in trouble with parents because they're like, oh, well, you just had a nice blah, blah. You had a well-disciplined son. Yes, because I created one. Because I went through the effort to do it. It was a lot of work. Yes, that's what parenting is, a lot of work. Okay? The other thing is that in our particular house, we always had grandma. Well, and I work from home. My wife basically works from home. She's a real estate agent. And so we adapted to the circumstances that we had. The other thing that I did was upstairs, the way our bedrooms are situated, you have a hallway, and then you have his bedroom, our bedroom, and then a bathroom. And then so I locked the bathroom door so he couldn't go in there. And then I created a gate so that he couldn't leave that hallway, because we had stairs. Then we also have the lake. I don't want him falling down the stairs. I don't want him falling in the lake when he's like 2 and he can't swim. Okay. But he can still walk around. Then what I did was on the gate, I put an actual gate lock. So it's like a latch, and then I can turn it, and then I can put a key in it, and I can lock it. And I use that we still actually use it. Don't really need it now, but we still use it just because it's out of habit. But I built that. And look, if I showed you a picture of it, you would be like, you built it? Because it's literally just a cut piece of board that's got some hinges on the wall. It is janky as all get out. Okay. But it's effective. That to me is how you deal with this stuff. I didn't have a 30-minute conversation with him. I took preventative measures to ensure that he could not do this. All right. Let's see. What else did we get? I'm going to get to a good one here in a minute. Oh, this is a good one. I like this. People say, people who don't spank their kids have kids who are impossible to be around. This is just like when we say, oh, if you spank your kids, they'll resent you. You are telling somebody something that may not line up with their lived experience, and you are not going to get through to them. Okay? If I tell somebody your child will resent you when for spanking them, and they look back and go, I don't resent my parents for spanking me, they're not going to believe you. The same thing applies here. If someone's like, people who spank their kids, who don't spank their kids, have kids who are impossible to be around. So what I said was, I can proudly say my son's jujitsu instructor, robotics teacher, school teachers, and every other adult who knows him absolutely loves when he's around. We do not spank. If you require spanking for other adults to enjoy your child's presence, then perhaps you suck as a parent. Okay? Everybody. And I am not lying. This isn't one of those times where, how parents are like, my child is a genius, and they're really just kind of smart. No, this is not that situation. Literally, compliment after compliment. Wow, he talks, and he can engage and have a conversation, and he is so well behaved, and we're like, thank you. We enjoy hearing this. And then we tell our son, thank you for being such a good kid. You are an awesome kid. We tell him that on the regular, because I want him to know that his behavior, because he's done it intentionally, I'm proud of. Because I want him to keep doing that behavior. Now, when he's 13 or something, maybe we'll run into some challenges. We'll deal with it then. Okay? So I think when people say that, I can tell them, no, that is objectively not true. Not because I, as a parent, say it and I believe it, because other people who don't need to tell me that have told me that. Here's how it works. If you have a good kid that other adults want to be around, and they tell you that you have a good kid, they're not necessarily telling you because they want to just say nice things to you. Because the alternative, if you have a kid that's not so pleasant, they just don't say anything, right? They don't have to say anything at all. They don't have to go, wow, I wish your kid was more well-behaved. They don't have to say anything. So the fact that they went out of their way, and it happens repeatedly, tells me something. It tells me that when my son is not in my presence, he is still well-behaved. Let me tell you a quick story, and we're going to move on to the last thing. When I was in my 20s, I was married to a different woman, my ex-wife, and we were youth directors at the church. And one day after church, I'm walking around talking to people, whatever, and she come to me and she's crying, and I'm like, the heck happened? So I would work with the high school students, and she would work with the junior high students. The junior high students were misbehaving. Like one of them got on the table and started dancing, like stood on the table, started dancing, acting like a fool. And so she said, look, if you don't want to listen to the lesson, fine, we'll clean the church. And she handed all of them like a broom and a mop and said, we're cleaning now. So after church, the kids went home, and a parent called up, some dad, talked to her and yelled at her for making his son, daughter, or whatever, I can't remember which one it was, for making their child clean. And they were like, I send my child to church to learn about God, not to clean. And my ex-wife at the time, because we were in our 20s, and she was being yelled at by a parent. She'd never experienced that, so she didn't know what to do. And I was like, did you tell them if you raised your child better, that they behaved while they weren't present, we wouldn't have this problem? Right? Like, that's what I would have said. And luckily that parent didn't contact me, because I would have been like, raise your kid better so that they behave when you're not around. My son, I would be floored, absolutely like totally shocked if somebody came and said he was dancing on the table when I told him to behave. I would be like, are you sure it was my kid? Because I know how he behaves when we're around, and I know how he behaves when we're not around, because other parents and teachers and adults have told me. I know this. I know what I can expect. And I would be floored. And he would be in a lot of trouble. And I'd be like, we don't raise you to be like that. You have disappointed daddy. That's what I would tell him. And I'd give him the stare. And I'd let him cry. I'd be like, you need it. You need to be embarrassed for embarrassing your daddy for this. Right? But that's not going to happen, because he's a good kid. He behaves when I'm not there. I mean, for the most part. I mean, like, yeah, he's still 7, right? 7-year-olds get in trouble. That's what they do. Little boys get in trouble. Not much. Like, the trouble that he gets into is very normal. And I'm like, yeah, it happens. You still need to be disciplined for it, right? Because it's still unacceptable behavior. It just happens to be behavior that falls within that range of what I'm willing to expect. And be like, yep, that happens. I'll deal with it. Okay? Talking too much in class? Okay, I'll deal with it. Right? Not doing his homework? Okay, I'll deal with it. These are all normal things that I would expect. I'm level set. Now let me get to this last one, because this one's good. Where did it go? Oh, shoot. Did I lose it? Oh, no. I'm going to find it. Oh, bother. Okay. So let me do something here real quick. I'll find it and I'll put it up on the screen here. So let me, give me a second. I thought I had it queued up and I missed it. So let me go find it, because this one got me and I was a bit insulting to somebody. But I think they kind of earned it. All right. So here it is. So here's this post. Somebody, one of my followers said, hey, here's a flow chart. Should you try strike your child? We're not going to talk about that. Somebody posted this video right here. All right. So let me pause and rewind it. And I'm going to play this video for you, and we're going to put the audio on. All right. There we go. All right. Now, if you're not watching, this is like a fat 13-year-old boy or something. I can't tell if he's beating up his sister or his mom. They're both fat, and he's being extremely violent. Okay? I don't know who's videotaping and not intervening, but whatever. All right, so he threatens to stab. And this kid looks, he's fat, so it's hard for me to tell just how old he is. All right? Some old video. But he's definitely around the 13, 14-year-old range. I've seen it before. It's been captioned that he was attacking his mom for telling him he couldn't have something. I don't know the full context. Personally, I don't really need to know the full context. All I know is that you have a boy attacking what appears to be a family member, presumably his mom, perhaps his sister. I'm assuming it's his mom and that it's a sibling that is videotaping. That's my assumption. I don't really know. And so somebody was like, perhaps they can tell us what corrects this behavior. Okay, because that's the big argument. And so what I said, number one, that's assault, not a simple temper tantrum by a toddler. If you're too ignorant to make that distinction, then this conversation isn't for you. Second, that type of behavior started long ago. Parenting failed when it mattered. And so then they pressed me and they were like, okay, but you didn't give me an answer. So then I said, he needs to be removed from that environment, perhaps a military school or a home for boys. Spanking will not correct that behavior. The parents have lost all control and are in no position to get it back. That you even brought it up as some sort of gotcha shows dishonesty or your own ignorance. And I mean that. And then we had a few exchanges back and forth. And then, because he was like, or he or she was like, oh, so military school, where they're going to physically punish him? And I'm like, yes. Because at this point, he is way too big for all these behaviors have been solidified. You have to undo them. And what's that saying? It's easier to build boys than to mend men. If you get to the age of 20 or 18 or somewhere around there, young man age, and you have not learned self-control, you have not learned how to properly manage your anger, how to express your anger in a productive way. If you haven't learned those, at this point, you are a danger to those around you. And the response from those around you might have to be physical force. This is why if I encounter somebody who cannot control their anger and might swing at me, I might have to punch him and beat him up. Not because there's no place for violence, but because at this point, that's all they recognize. And the way to address that needs to be a specific environment designed to deal with that and undo the damage. But a 2-year-old that smacks you, that's not the same. A 2-year-old that smacks you, they don't know any better. They're still running on raw emotion and still figuring out the world. They've literally had exactly 2 years to experience the world, of which, 6 months? Because the first year, they're just screaming and they can't even crawl, roughly the first year, right? They can't even move, right? So by the time they're 2 or 3, they're barely learning how to use their arms and legs to do things. They're learning how to talk. They're still at an age where these approaches that I'm presenting actually work. They're not going to work when they're 13, 14 and older. Now you need a different strategy. It's an entirely different ballgame. And in my opinion, if your child is 13 or 14, is it possible that you can undo the damage that you've wrought on your kid as a parent? Yes, I will say it's possible. It's one of those situations where I say possible but not probable. Because you yourself probably don't have the tools, you didn't have the tools to do it right in the first place. What is the likelihood that you have the tools to undo that kind of damage? You probably don't. So that child probably needs to be removed, and they need to be in an environment where somebody who has those tools and is prepared for what may come, they're prepared to deal with them. So it's not a gotcha. I don't know why people present that that's the end result. That's what we get by not doing all these things or by doing worse. So a lot of my anti-spanking crowd stay opposed to spanking, but also learn to address the arguments that are presented. Not the behavior you don't like, which is generally what's happening. Generally, if you say, again, I'll repeat this. If you say, oh, spanking does this and you're a terrible monster and all this, you're not addressing the argument, which means to some degree, you're complicit. You are part of the problem. Stop being part of the problem. Learn how to communicate. I mean, if you're it's a certain irony that you're we need to communicate to children in a way they understand. The same goes for adults. And if adult doesn't understand how, spanking is, how disciplining a child can be done without spanking, then lay it out in a way they can understand. Otherwise, I don't want to hear you talk about how against spanking you are. You just want to argue with people and just insult them. But you're really not against spanking. Because people who are really against spanking will do whatever it takes to communicate that message as effectively as possible. That's what you do when you're against it. But if you just berate people, if you just insult them, if you just walk around puffing up your chest because you've never spanked your child, you're just an arrogant prick. That's all you are. All right. That's my show. It's a wrap. Hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, maybe even a little inspiring to go out and give better arguments. If you enjoyed the conversation, do me a solid. Head down to the comments. Let me know what you thought. Maybe you've got a different take. Maybe you've got something that, maybe you got something that you want me to talk about. Maybe you're like, hey, DL, I wish you would have mentioned this. What are your thoughts on this? Right? Or maybe you just want to give me a little praise. Hey, that was a great argument. That was a great show. Whatever the case, every comment helps the show grow. I genuinely read them all, and I'm totally not above the praise. Just saying, throwing it out there. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, I'm out. Have a great one. You know that I'm all about supporting organizations that hold my values. Make sure you head on over to blackgunsmatter.shop. They've got apparel, stickers, and more. Use the code LibertyDad, all one word, at checkout to score a 10% discount. Or just hit the referral link in the show notes. That'll make it so much easier. Remember, I'm not just a voice on a mic. I'm a dad who's working hard to deliver to you the best libertarian content. Connect with me on Linktree, where you'll find links to my Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, because every bit helps keep this show rolling. Plus, you can find me on my other platforms to stay in the loop. With your help, this show, The Message of Liberty, will be seen and heard by more people. As always, I appreciate you tuning in and look forward to seeing you